My name is Brooke Miller, and in the high-stakes world of Chicago real estate, I don't sell houses. I sell the illusion of a perfect life. At Transit Shidoy. I have mastered the art of the closing and the poker face because in this city, if you show weakness, you lose the commission. I lived that same philosophy at home with Caleb Wright, a pharmaceutical sales rep who was as polished as a new showroom floor. We had been together for 3 years. A partnership that looked like a gold-plated investment to everyone on the outside looking in. People might judge me for what I did next. But in a city this cold, you need a backup plan. Over the last 18 months, I had quietly funneled $25,000 from our supposed joint savings into a private account for a down payment on a penthouse he knew nothing about. When Caleb asked why our vacation fund seemed stagnant, I just shrugged and said, "The market is volatile right now. Caleb, we have to be smart with our liquid assets." He bought it because he thought he was the only one in the room capable of a long con. The flickering light in the basement was the only reason I opened the gray electrical panel behind the furnace on a Tuesday evening. Taped to the interior door was a matte black burner phone, its screen glowing with a notification that shattered my 3-year investment in seconds. I stared at the message from a contact saved only as S, which read, "Grant is working late. Come over and show me that new sample kit." My blood didn't boil. It turned to ice, because I realized my $25,000 insurance policy wasn't just a precaution. It was a necessity. "Brooke, are you down there messing with the breakers again?" Caleb shouted from the top of the stairs, his voice dripping with that rehearsed concern I once mistook for love. I shoved the phone into my back pocket and slammed the panel shut, feeling the cold metal vibrate against my palm. "Just checking the fuse for the kitchen island." "Everything is fine," I replied as he stepped into the light, looking every bit the loyal partner. He wrapped his arms around me and whispered, "You work too hard. Let's just order takeout and forget the world exists." While I felt the burner phone hum against my hip like a ticking bomb, I spent 48 hours dissecting every byte of data on that burner phone while Caleb was out closing deals in the suburbs. He and Sienna Thompson weren't just playing house. They were orchestrating a financial heist against my future. Text threads revealed a plan to drain our $50,000 wedding fund to pay the lease on her new dental clinic. "It's our deposit. Caleb, we earned this together," she'd messaged. And his reply was, "Brooke thinks it's for a ring. Let her dream while we build our reality." I didn't break any crystal. Instead, I tracked down Grant Thompson, an IT systems administrator, on LinkedIn. I messaged him with a clinical subject line, "Audit of shared assets regarding Sienna." We met 3 hours later in the rain-slicked parking lot of the local hospital where he managed the complex servers. As I climbed into his car, I said, "I think we have a mutual problem involving $50,000 and 2 very expensive liars." "You're the realtor," Grant said quietly, his eyes fixed on a tablet glowing with live tracking data. I nodded, stating, "And you're the man whose wife is planning to open a clinic with my money." He finally turned, his face a mask of exhausted precision, and asked, "How deep does your paper trail go, Brooke?" I slid a folder of screenshots across the console and replied, "Deep enough to bury them both if we play this right." Grant scanned the numbers carefully and then tapped his tablet, showing a red dot centered on a West Loop hotel. "I've been logging her car's GPS for months, and she isn't at any dental convention," he whispered. I looked at the tracking map and said, "Caleb told me he was at a sales seminar in Naperville tonight." Grant checked the timestamp and muttered, "The seminar ended at 4 p.m. But they've been in that room since 5:30. I don't want a divorce, Grant. I want a total liquidation of their arrogance," I told him firmly. He looked at the command prompt on his laptop and asked, "Are you ready to see how fast a digital life can crumble?" I adjusted my coat and replied, I want them to realize the people they ignored are the ones holding the keys. Grant nodded slowly and said, Then I'll provide the data. And you provide the stage for the final act. The steakhouse was filled with the smell of $100 ribeyes and the sound of overconfident men discussing their portfolios. I walked toward the corner booth where Caleb sat laughing with Sienna, his hand resting on her arm like he owned the place. I didn't realize your sales seminar involved a 5-course meal and a dental hygienist. Caleb, I said, pulling a chair from a neighboring table. He froze, his polished smile fracturing as he looked from me to the man standing directly behind my shoulder. Brooke. What a surprise. We were just discussing a potential client referral, Caleb said, his voice instantly shifting into his professional sales pitch. I sat down and looked at Sienna, whose face was turning the color of the expensive Malbec in her glass. Is that what we're calling it now? Caleb, because Grant here has some very interesting data regarding the room service bill at the West Loop Hotel you two visited at 5:30. I replied, leaning forward into his personal space. Grant. Man. You shouldn't be here. Brooke is clearly having some kind of episode, Caleb insisted, his eyes darting toward the exits. Grant didn't move an inch, his voice a steady, chilling monotone as he spoke. I have the GPS logs of Sienna's car parked in your driveway 3 nights a week. Caleb. So let's skip the mental health diagnosis, Grant said. Sienna finally found her voice, whispering, Grant, please. Let's talk about this in private. You're making a scene. A scene is what happens when you try to steal $50,000 from my wedding fund to pay for your clinic cabinets. Sienna. I said loudly enough for the next table to pause their conversation. Caleb slammed his napkin onto the table and hissed. You're being hysterical over a misunderstanding. I was helping her with a business plan. I laughed. A sound as cold as a Chicago winter. And replied, a business plan usually involves a bank, not your girlfriend's joint savings account. I can explain every cent. Brooke. I was going to pay it back with interest, Caleb claimed, trying to reach for my hand across the white tablecloth. I pulled back as if his touch was toxic and said, in real estate, we call this a predatory loan. Except the collateral is your soul. Grant leaned down, his shadow falling over Sienna, and added, and in IT, we call this a system-wide failure, which is why I've already changed the locks on our house. You can't do that. That's my home, Sienna shrieked, her voice cracking the sophisticated atmosphere of the room. Grant looked at her with zero emotion and said, it was our home until you decided to turn our marriage into a fraudulent transaction. I turned my attention back to Caleb, who was sweatily adjusting his tie like a man caught in a deposition. You really thought you were the smartest guy in the room, didn't you? Caleb? I asked, watching him crumble. I did it for us. Brooke. I wanted to build a future where we didn't have to work so hard, he whispered. A desperate lie that didn't even land. I shook my head and replied, no. You did it because you're a cheap imitation of a high roller who can't even afford his own mistress. People were staring now, their forks suspended in midair as the drama unfolded like a primetime special. Caleb stood up and said, I'm leaving. We're done here. You've embarrassed me for the last time. Sit back down. Caleb. Because I haven't even started the appraisal on your wreckage yet, I commanded. And for some reason, he obeyed. I looked around the room and told him, you love the audience, so enjoy it while it lasts. Sienna was sobbing into her linen napkin, her shoulders shaking as she realized the dental clinic dream was evaporating. Is the $50,000 worth the fact that your husband knows you're a thief? Sienna? I asked. But she couldn't even look up. Brooke. Please. Let's just go home and talk like adults. Caleb begged, his bravado completely extinguished. I stood up, smoothing my skirt, and replied, "We don't have a home anymore. We have a property that is being liquidated as of tomorrow morning." Grant stepped back, nodding to me as if we were closing a business deal. "I'll see you in court." "Sienna, I've already retained a lawyer who specializes in marital fraud," he said. "This is just a dinner. You can't prove anything else." Caleb snapped, trying to regain some footing as he glared at the surrounding patrons. I pulled the burner phone from my purse and set it on the table between us. "Actually, I can prove the hotel stayed on my credit card last month while you said you were in Peoria," I said. Caleb looked at the phone as if it were a venomous snake, his face going pale under the dim restaurant lights. "You went through my things? That's low." "Even for you," he whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. I tilted my head and replied, "Low is using my commissions to buy jewelry for a woman who cleans teeth for a living." Sienna stood up, grabbing her coat, but Grant blocked her path with a calm, terrifying stillness. "You're not going anywhere until we discuss how you used my login to order clinic supplies," Grant stated. "I needed that equipment to get started." "You wouldn't understand the pressure," Sienna cried, her eyes darting between us. Grant chuckled, a dry sound that had no humor in it, and said, "I understand that theft is a felony in this state." "Sienna," I looked at Caleb, who was now staring at his feet, the image of the successful salesman completely shattered. "The closing on your life starts tonight, Caleb. And trust me, the terms are non-negotiable," I told him. I leaned in one last time, my lips inches from Caleb's ear, and whispered, "I hope she was worth the $50,000, because you're about to find out how expensive I can really be." Caleb looked at me with genuine terror, finally realizing that I wasn't the predictable partner he could manipulate. "You're crazy. You're going to lose everything too," he spat. A final, weak attempt at a counterattack. I smiled, a sharp, predatory grin, and said, "I have a $25,000 penthouse waiting for me, Caleb. But you? You have nothing." I turned and walked out of the restaurant, the click of my heels echoing on the hardwood floor like a gavel hitting a bench. Grant followed me out into the cool night air, leaving the two of them trapped in the middle of a room full of people who now knew exactly who they were. "That was efficient," Grant remarked as we reached the valet stand. I pulled out my car keys and replied, "Efficiency is for amateurs." "Grant, I'm going for total market dominance." "What's the next move?" he asked, his posture finally relaxing as the adrenaline began to fade. I looked toward the skyline and told him, "Now we hit them where it actually hurts, their paychecks and their pride." Grant smiled for the first time since we met and said, "I'll have the server logs ready by morning." I got into my car and said, "Make sure you include the bribery records from the pharmaceutical reps. I want his boss to see everything." The drive home was quiet, but for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like a void. I looked at the city lights and realized that Caleb had made the mistake of treating me like a passive asset. In this town, you either own the ground you stand on or you get built over. I'm not just a realtor. "Caleb," I whispered to the empty passenger seat, "I'm the one who decides when the lease is up, and your time is officially expired." Caleb stormed into my office the next morning, slamming a folder onto my desk while my assistant tried to block him. "You crossed a federal line, Brooke, and my lawyer is already drafting a suit for invasion of privacy and defamation," he yelled, his face a blotchy mess. I didn't even look up from my contract, simply stating, "Invasion of privacy implies you had a right to use my credit card for a hotel room." He leaned over and hissed, That burner phone was private property. And using it will cost you your real estate license. I finally set my pen down and looked him in the eye, feeling the absolute power of the digital trail Grant provided. You're worried about my license while you're violating the anti-kickback statute with half the doctors in Chicago. Caleb, I remarked coolly. His bravado flickered as he stammered. I don't know what you're talking about. Those were legitimate marketing expenses. I leaned back and replied, marketing expenses usually don't involve $15,000 in untraceable debit cards handed over in steakhouse bathrooms. Caleb's hand started to shake as he reached for the folder. But I swiped it away before he could touch it. Check your work email. Though I imagine your access was revoked by corporate compliance 10 minutes ago. I told him. He fumbled for his phone, his voice cracking as he whispered, What did you do? Brooke, you're ruining everything for a petty grudge? I stood up and adjusted my blazer, saying, I didn't ruin it. I just reported the felony you documented in your own sent folder. My phone buzzed with a text from Grant, audit complete. Hospital security is escorting Sienna out of the building right now. I showed Caleb the screen and said, It looks like your partner in crime is having a rough morning at the dental wing. Caleb slumped into a chair, looking smaller and more pathetic than I ever imagined possible. She just wanted her own practice. She wasn't trying to hurt anyone. He mumbled like a child caught stealing. I scoffed and replied, Stealing medical supplies and my money to build a dream is still a crime. Caleb, I'll give you the $50,000 back. I'll take out a loan. Just tell them you made a mistake. He begged. Bargaining, replacing his earlier threats. I walked around the desk and looked out at the city, feeling no pity for the man who tried to play me. You can't pay back a federal investigation. And I definitely didn't make a mistake when I hit send on those attachments. I replied. He stood up slowly, his legs looking weak, and asked, So you're just going to watch me go to prison? I turned my head and said, I'm not just watching. Caleb, I'm the one who provided the evidence. Grant called me an hour later, his voice sounding like a man who had finally cleared a virus from a system. The hospital is filing a report for the $20,000 in equipment Sienna siphoned off over the last 6 months. He reported. I gripped the phone and asked, Did she try to blame Caleb for the theft? Grant let out a dry laugh and said, She tried to blame everyone. But the logs and the security footage don't lie. I nodded to the empty office and replied, Good. She can practice her hygiene skills in a state facility. Caleb sent an email from a generic account that afternoon, titled Please Brooke, in all capital letters. I read the first line. They've suspended me pending a full audit. My accounts are frozen and I have nowhere to go. I didn't bother to reply, instead forwarding the message to the investigator I'd spoken with earlier that morning. The market value of your life just hit 0. Caleb. I whispered to the screen before hitting the delete key. I called my lawyer and told him, Start the partition suit on the house. I want his equity liquidated immediately. By late afternoon, the news of the pharma sales scandal was already whispering through the local professional networking groups. I walked out of my office and told my assistant, If Caleb calls, tell him I don't accept calls from inmates or liars. She nodded, sensing the shift in power, and asked, Are we still showing the Gold Coast penthouse at 6? I smiled. A genuine, sharp expression of triumph, and replied, Absolutely. I have a reputation to maintain and a new life to start. A month after the dust settled, I stood on the balcony of my new $850,000 penthouse overlooking the Chicago River. The air was crisp, and for the first time in years, the space around me didn't feel crowded by someone else's calculated lies. I poured a glass of wine and checked my phone, seeing the final decree for the partition sale of our old house. My lawyer had confirmed the transfer of my $120,000 equity share earlier that morning, telling me, "It's a clean break. Brooke." And he's officially off the title. Caleb didn't fare quite as well in the transition from polished salesman to investigated felon. The pharmaceutical board revoked his sales license permanently after the bribery records went public, effectively ending his career in the industry. I heard through the grapevine that he was now hauling crates at a suburban shipping warehouse for minimum wage to cover his mounting legal fees. When a mutual friend mentioned how far he'd fallen, I simply replied, "The market has a way of correcting itself when an asset is overvalued." Sienna's downfall was just as surgical, executed with clinical precision by Grant in the divorce court. He successfully argued for a complete forfeiture of her marital assets based on the $20,000 in medical equipment she had siphoned from the hospital. Her dental hygiene license was suspended indefinitely, leaving her with a mountain of debt and a resume that no medical office in the city would ever touch. Grant called me to finalize our shared documents and remarked, "She asked for mercy yesterday." So I reminded her that mercy wasn't in our original contract. I watched the sun set behind the Willis Tower, knowing that none of them had escaped the wreckage they built. Caleb's polished suits and Sienna's clinical dreams were now just fragments in a public record of fraud and betrayal. There was no grand apology. And I didn't want one because their bankrupted lives were the only closure I needed to move forward. I set my glass down on the marble counter and whispered to the empty, quiet room, "The audit is finally complete." The silence in my new $850,000 penthouse is the most expensive luxury I have ever owned. I used to think success was about the volume of the noise. But now I know it is about the clarity of the truth. Trust is no longer a default setting for me. It is a premium feature that must be paid for in honesty and consistency. I am no longer looking for a partner to complete my portfolio, but a reality that requires no private investigation to verify. Caleb and Sienna are now just cautionary tales I share when the conversation turns to the cost of underestimating a woman with a plan. The $120,000 I reclaimed was the price of my liberation from a beautiful, calculated lie. Chicago is a city built on grit, and my foundation is finally solid enough to withstand any storm. I am Brooke Miller, and I have learned that the only person worth investing in is the one looking back in the mirror. Thank you for following Brooke's journey of justice and self-discovery. If you believe that honesty is the only foundation worth building on, please subscribe to our channel for more cinematic stories of truth and transformation. Your support helps us bring these powerful narratives to life. Until next time, stay sharp.